Call to order the April 15th board meeting of the Menlo Park Fire Protection District. Roll call.
Roll call, Director Ianson,
Here.
Director Corrali,
Here.
Director Carpenter, here, Director Bernstein,
Present.
Director Solano, here.
Please rise for the pledge of allegiance.
The other side direction.
You keep moving it.
The other flag.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. There is no reportable action out of closed session. We will have a closed session meeting immediately following this right here in this room. Okay. That leads us to public comment number 2. Is there anything, anybody want to talk about anything that's on the agenda or not on the agenda?
Yes, we have somebody who wanted to provide public comment.
Hi. Do I stand up for you?
You may,
Well, the podium wasn't.
you can stand right there if you want.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're around the
You can
crowd.
sit too. Okay, I want to sit. I'm kind of honored to be here at the same time, and I'm just here. John explained to me, you know, making why the payments have increased for small businesses for the fire permit. And I just had a really tough year last year when I came back after I had my son. The shop was mismanaged. So last year was my fix-it year. And we're finally bouncing back in 2014. And I'm here to request for an installment payment because I really do respect the hard work of these men. I'm looking at their, you know, I love you guys. My son loves firefighters right now and are very into, I think he is a future firefighter. He's outside. And I'm requesting for some help. As a small business, you know, it's a little tough, and I'm planning on not staying small because I want to be able to afford things and survive. But I'm here in front of the board just asking for just a little bit of help. But I do want to make sure I make the payment, and I will definitely make sure I pay it on time for next year.
As a matter of rule, the board can't respond to public items that aren't on the agenda, but,
Yes.
okay, thank you.
That's it. What I need to say.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
We are going to discuss this in the agenda, right?
Is this going to be
We have an
discussion
agenda
item?
item.
Is it going to be agenda?
I think it's item 14.
It is.
That's number
Is it
14.
14?
Could we not bring it forward and perhaps discuss it now or something? Since it is an agenda, it's a publicly noticed agenda item. She's got a child here, we probably want to leave the meeting and not wait till that item is considered.
Should we
Oh,
do-
I would stay. The only reason why, and not an excuse, he has some stitches right now that I'm wanting to make sure I don't have him moving around too much. That's the only reason why I'm leaving, but I would have stayed.
I'm just suggesting that we could maybe discuss it now and you could just stay for a
Okay.
couple minutes.
So I
Well,
will
here's
ask,
the first item on the consent calendar, I mean, the regular agenda. Maybe we just do the consent calendar unless someone wants to pull items off and then go to the regular agenda and then go back to the reports and requests.
is there any reason we can't just
Do
we
number
don't have to
14?
do the consent calendar first?
No? Okay.
You can do whatever you want. All right.
Okay.
So then, in that case, we're going to skip a lot of the reports, consent calendar, and we'll go straight to the regular agenda, item number 14. That will be the first thing, first order of business. Hearing on any objections to be submitted, reports of location subject to fee assessments for our annual inspection. Okay. Is there, do I have?
I'll move.
Second.
Okay, discussion.
I'd like to ask the question. I was just curious, is there any provision for installment plans or an arrangement with the district to pay on a?
So we have representatives from fire prevention here for the exact reason, Director, but I can tell you past history,
We have had people come in here before and ask if the board, and only the board, can waive fees. In terms of payment installments, I'm not as familiar with that, but it could be that something that prevention's done before. We've made a number of accommodations for business owners, for residents in the past, so it would be up to the board. As far as I know, you can pretty much do whatever you want, and I'll defer to John, who's the acting fire marshal right now.
I'm actually gonna defer to Ron because he's in charge of the hazmat.
Well, the
service,
question I
which
want to
falls
ask,
under, so.
How much?
it's just, what's staff's what's your recommendation for fire prevention about delaying or installment, relative to what our request is?
I guess the first question that I would have from the prevention side is, which business is this?
Lady Partada.
Okay,
Lady Partada Mother.
over on University?
No, in Middlefield.
In the middle,
Second.
okay, so this is for a hazmat fee, and then so, as the chief discussed, you have the option to waive a fee. We haven't done payments in the past, to my knowledge, in the past 10 years. And I would say that it would be, because the board's the only group that can waive the fees, is that, honestly, you could tell us that we can do installments from the board's directive, is what you can tell us.
And so
Let me
if
just,
we-
let me just chime in on that. What I would say is that I agree. I think that to the extent the board can decide to waive a fee, you could decide to allow installments. You wouldn't do that tonight. What you would do is, I understand that this list of businesses is a list that you would be sending to collections essentially. What you would do is strike this business off the list, and then you could direct staff to work with the business to figure out the installments if you wanted to go that route.
And can I say one more thing? So, the purpose of prevention is not to be punitive. I mean, the purpose of prevention is to prevent problems from occurring. And I think, in the past, whether it's been in the field or, again, waiving fees, which is the one example I'm familiar with, actually two examples, the district has tried to work with people. And I think you have a business owner tonight that's asking for us to work with her. And our past history has always been that we try and accommodate that in the field, whether it's numerous inspections and we work towards a goal together with the business owner, or we do something like waiving the fee altogether. I wouldn't recommend waiving the fee because I think it opens up different implications, but it sounds like you do have a business owner that's willing to work with the district.
I'd like to speak if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I do honestly want to pay. I do feel that it's something that after understanding what the fees are for, I think it's, as a small business that really relies on the help of the firefighters, I do think it's something that I want to stand by, and I do want to pay. I don't want it to be waived.
Thank you.
Which one is it? Your business again?
Number
Second
7,
one's on
number
the-
7, yeah.
Number 7?
I'd like to pick up on that suggestion. We have a motion on the table. I would move to amend the motion to remove property number 7 from the list and to authorize the chief within his budget authority to arrange payments on a mutually acceptable basis. Chief has a budget authority which is well below this, well above this amount. And so my amendment to the motion would do two things. Take number 7 off this list and then authorize the chief to arrange mutually acceptable installment payments within his budget authority.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion on the amendment?
Is that separate discussion, or?
Yeah. You
We're
can
talking
really
about
discuss
the
the
amendment now, the
motion.
amendment that Peter made.
Well, yes, I'd like to ask, just because I'd like to know what we're dealing with in terms of this. Do I understand correctly that this is 2 years' worth of fee that's at issue here?
Yeah.
That's correct?
Yeah.
And so,
Understand this.
I believe it's the only one where there's 2 years, which is, I'm just trying to understand the situation. I'm just curious, what did we do a year ago about these things, and what does it mean to send something to collections?
Well, to send to collections is exactly what it sounds like. It goes to collections, and I believe we did that about 3 or 4 years ago, Ron. We never sent anybody to collections, yeah. We never sent them to collections, it was basically, okay. So,
Do you sell the debt to a private firm? Is that what going to collection means to you?
I'm gonna have to defer to John, I guess that's what we're doing.
We don't know.
So I'm the one who wrote this report, so I can give you a little bit more information on what's going on here.
Okay.
So 2 years ago, the invoicing and the tracking was all held within the Fire Prevention Division. This year, we were able to incorporate the invoicing into our accounting software and manage our invoicing a little bit better and our collections a little bit better. With that said, we have an understanding of who owes us money and who doesn't owe us money. We made multiple attempts to collect, ranging to approximately 5 to 6 attempts. Those attempts were made by mail, by phone call, to each of the 8 different companies. And we received different responses from all the different companies. Some for financial reasons haven't been able to pay, others for political reasons are choosing not to pay, etc. Every single time the district makes an attempt to collect, it involves staff time. So at this point, we were hoping that the board would entertain a motion to take this item to collections so that the staff is no longer burdened with the attempts to collect this money. When we do go to collections, there will be a portion of those funds that will be due to the collection agency, and we will receive an amount less than 100%. We have never, as Fire Prevention indicated, we've never gone to collections. I have not had the opportunity to research the collection agencies at this time. We just wanted the board to understand there's a current situation here and wanted to get some direction from the board on how we should proceed.
Let me follow up then with a question. The district has some authority in terms of closing the business, I assume. Can you tell us what that is?
If they don't pay for their permit, then the items that are on the permit, they would have to discontinue using. In this case, if it was an auto repair facility that we're issuing the permit for, they would have to stop repairing parts, yes.
And that's separate from what a collection agency would do, so it still involves staff time and so forth. I guess I'm not disagreeing with this at all. In fact, I'm supportive of it, but I'm just trying to understand what else we should be doing. So I just want to understand the whole process before I vote on the amendment that Peter has suggested here. Are you also, if you went to collections, would you also pursue the statutory revenue you have?
I don't believe we would at that point, because we're making an attempt to get the fees.
If you were successful. If you
Correct.
went to collections, you're unsuccessful, then I think it comes
That's
right back in
That's
your lap
what
again.
that's- yeah.
Okay.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
So I guess the next question, how many chances do you give a business if they don't respond the first time? Like, let's say Menlo Atherton High School doesn't respond. Do you give them 2 more chances, 3 more chances? It's a high school.
The invoices are sent out in October so that they can have their permit in hand by January 1st, and the permits are good for the calendar year.
Okay.
So, and we're into April, and we have some people who have, like John said, have not paid.
Can we assume that Menlo Atherton has paid in the past, so it's not a jurisdictional issue?
No, you cannot assume that. In the past, the district had a different standpoint with working with other school agencies, the cities and whatnot, but when the district board authorized the most recent fee waiver policy, those agencies were no longer exempt. And I believe this is the first year that we actually are charging Menlo Atherton, the city of Menlo Park, and many other agencies these fees.
But the city of Menlo Park has paid apparently.
Correct.
Okay.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor.
You call the question.
All those in favor
This is
say
the amendment.
of the amendment,
The amended,
the amendment to the original motion.
Can you say what the amendment is, or somebody can say what the amendment is?
The amendment is as council suggested, that we remove business number 7 from the list, and we authorize the chief within his budgetary authority to arrange mutually acceptable installment payments.
Mutually acceptable.
whatever they want.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, those opposed? Abstain. All right. So that brings us back to
The motion
the original motion,
is to accept the report.
which was to accept the report.
So except for the report, doesn't that mean that we're also voting to send it to collections?
All except for business number 7.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
Well, let me say, I think we should collect our money, there's no question about it. I'm a little concerned about a new, like Menlo Atherton, sending Menlo Atherton to collections or something, somehow that, and I don't know about any of these other businesses, if there's, we should get our money, but I would hope that we send it to collections at a time without rushing it or doing something that we're going to look foolish later on.
So, Director, to your question about Menlo Atherton did call me, and to your point, has difficulty, number one, because they've never been charged, number two, because they see themselves as a nonprofit, and they felt that the fee was illegitimate, and they filed a protest with me, and I asked them to please put it in writing, attend the meeting, give us some form of official protest, request for a waiver, whatever they would choose to do, and nothing has come in, so.
And is it your feeling that these other businesses here are not cooperating?
I haven't worked with them. The only one that I've heard from was Menlo Atherton, and John could speak to who he's dealt with.
Yeah, so, in certain cases, it's very possible that some of the businesses that are on this list may be closed at this point in time. We sent several notices. I received 8 responses from the certified letters that I sent to them. Therefore, I would assume that 8 of those businesses are still in business. However, none of them made contact in response to the letter that I sent, which requested that they contact me if they want to discuss it, other than the owner of Lady Parts. And unfortunately, every single time we call these businesses, either they will not answer their phones, or when they do answer their phones, they are not willing to discuss the matter. They defer to somebody else within the business, and we cannot get a straight answer. Hence, making further attempts will most likely be unsuccessful.
So it seems to me like this is a really good next step. And in the event that collection's unsuccessful after a period of time, if the staff determines to be reasonable, then either you can come back to us, but I don't think you need to. At that point, you could certainly exercise your statutory authority and just issue them a citation saying, you've got to stop this business. And I don't think you need the board to act on that.
Fire prevention.
I just have one last note. My experience, but it could be different in different places, is that if you turn something over to collections and you subsequently waive the fee for whatever reason, that you then become liable for what they would have collected on that fee. So that I would just caution you to be careful that the district is not getting charged.
So to respond to that, so the district staff cannot waive any fees. Only the district board can waive the fee. The only agency that would possibly be entertained a fee waiver would be Menlo Atherton, in my opinion, and they chose not to attend tonight's meeting. With that said, if they're unwilling to attend the meeting requesting a fee waiver, therefore we cannot grant a fee waiver, and the fee that we're charging them would be due.
The only item I might throw out in regards to consideration for the MA High School is that since the school is a state mandated required occupancy, we are required to be out there annually anyways by state mandate, that if that's a matter of concern in regards to sending them to collection, that could be a consideration that we're already going out there as a state requirement. And maybe that could be included if that's a consideration, if you want to hold that off as a separate item.
Can I follow up on that also? Are you going out there because you inspect schools, or are you going out there because they have hazardous materials?
Both.
And what kinds of hazardous materials do they have?
The swimming pool has chlorine and muriatic acid above the permit amounts.
So it's the swimming pool, not the chemistry lab or someplace like that?
The chemistry lab has lower than permit amounts.
That's scary. My kid was a water polo player.
There you go.
Okay, if there is no further discussion.
Well, yeah, can we talk about MA for a minute? I mean, do we
We are
want to?
talking about, it. We want to talk
Look,
about.
I thought you was gonna vote on the motion here.
Well, you can,
But in other words, maybe we want to
we haven't
entertain
called
another
the question
amendment.
yet.
Well, we might want to consider an amendment or something.
We can make one.
Excuse me, Chief,
I think they were-
what did they tell you?
They were complaining because they've never been assessed before. We did work with them recently, within the last, well, a year ago, on a road that they put in, which cost them a significant amount of money so we could access classrooms. We worked out a really good arrangement with them based upon additional construction for our accessibility to center core classrooms. And they felt that that was a good relationship. It was a good time that we had together. They didn't agree with what was going on now, and they kind of deferred back to, this is not how we like doing business, is to get a bill for something that we've never gotten a bill before.
So your recommendation is for us to go forward and turn this over to collection agency?
No, I told them I could not waive the fee.
No, but I mean
explained
to bring it to us.
I agree with John. I think there's a different way to do this, and that's why I brought it up that we had a conversation. I think this is the only entity that there is a history of closely working together
So
with them to resolve issues.
I'm gonna make an amended motion to take Menlo Atherton number 8 from this list of businesses off the list. And, I gotta know, I mean,
Is there a second?
What was the motion?
No, it's amendment.
an amendment to the motion, which is basically.
Take number 8 off.
And number 8 off the list.
Well, I'll second that motion, but I want to ask a question then as part of the
Well,
discussion.
Now we-
let me ask one question, because why haven't we collected before?
Why have we not collected before? Because it was waived internally. And once the rules changed, that either prevention or the fire chief wasn't able to waive their fee, it was you, the board. So at this point, the new rule is, we can't, me, the fire chief, prevention, we can't waive anything. It has to come before this body to be legitimate and heard in public, for the benefit of the public and for the public to know that a fee has been waived or a payment plan or what have you.
The question,
That's when we legitimize the fee schedule and the process.
I want to ask about other public and private schools in Menlo Park. Have we waived, have the other schools paid?
John would know that answer.
Looking right now.
We build,
Menlo School, Menlo College.
School and Menlo College, and yes, they have paid.
And Sacred Heart.
And Sacred Heart.
Which are private schools.
Private
Schools, yes.
But what about Hillview and those kinds of schools?
But then-
Don't have chemicals over preventative valves.
City of Menlo Park, Burgess Pool.
Burgess Pool, yes, and they pay their fees.
So I have a list, if you'd like to hear some of the different agencies that we did bill for hazardous material that have paid. Atherton Police Department, City of East Palo Alto Courtyard, City of Menlo Park, Menlo Atherton High, they pay Menlo College, Menlo School, Ravenswood City School District, Sacred Heart, Town of Atherton, Westby Sanitary, are all agencies that were recently billed and paid.
Okay, I'd like to withdraw my second from the motion.
I'm gonna
because-
withdraw my motion, actually.
What do we have now?
Second.
Well, you have to have a
I-
motion that was seconded, and I believe you have to vote on that.
The original motion, the acceptance of the report and the referral of audit number 7 to collections.
So,
We withdraw
and we're
the
calling the
amendment
question
in the
on,
second. So
Call
we're
it
back to
the
the original
motion.
item number 14.
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay.
That's.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you for taking the time to come.
No, I wanted to show my face and take responsibility.
Well, and thanks for really being willing to work with the district, too.
Thank you.
Don't forget about the Easter egg.
Oh, he is coming.
Okay, great, thank you. So,
Thank you.
Okay, that puts us back up to where we need to start.
should we do the pledge again? I'm excited.
Menlo Park Firefighters Benevolent Activities Report.
Yeah, I don't know if I can top that. Hi, Aaron McDonald, Menlo Firefighter Association President. Nice to meet the new director, well, old director now back, and new director, how you guys doing?
Great to be here.
Three things to report on this weekend. If you haven't done the flyer yet, it's our annual egg hunt. We have it at Burgess Park, very popular. If you have any interest in finding out the history, you can find it on the Menlo Park Firefighting Association webpage. Coming up April 26th will be our, what we've called previously Christmas in April. It's actually part of Rebuilding Together. Scott Hilton and Jeff Hendricks have taken us on. They found a house and they will be working on it on the 26th. And I believe with help from the fire district and supporting same apparatus to support it. Just a couple weeks ago, it's been our 6th year in a row for the American Lung Association of California Fight for Air Stair Climb. We once again won the title for team, and for the overall, let's see, hold on, let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 were all in the top 40. Number 1 was Eric McGlennon, number 2 was Joey Pagoni, and number 4 was Chris Dennebaum. All from Menlo Park Fire won that thing. For the overall firefighter circle, that's when we dress up and everything's minus the Scott bottle. Pretty impressive. Of the top 4, 3 of them were Menlo Park firefighters. Number 1, Joey Pagoni. Number 2, Chris Dennebaum. And number 4, probationary firefighter Anthony Ramirez. We're doing well. So, and that's it. That's the end of my report.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So our workout program's working.
Right. Your
I'm gonna sit
diets
down.
are working.
Yeah, but next time we some
Good job.
training apparatus running.
Okay, reports and requests, President's report. I don't believe I have anything. How about reports and requests from directors?
I've got something.
Okay,
So just a reminder, I'm working on the board's policies and procedures with Rob. And so far, I've gotten feedback from everyone, and I'm gonna try to bring this to the main meeting. If you have additional things that you think of, just send them over to Rob or me.
okay, and that'll be put on the regular agenda
For May, yeah,
Okay.
that's the intent, right?
Right, exactly.
All right,
I've got something about these things.
yes.
First, I'd like to thank John Johnson for this never-ending saga with these fire investigator courses. We did their presentation to the Urban Area Security Initiative, and they want a direct link to terrorism to fund some of these things. So we need to go back to the drawing board on some of that. I've contacted San Mateo County Office of Emergency Services, and they have some funding relative to training for fire inspectors and investigation. When the Urban Area Security Initiative came up with the evaluation of the courses that your group wanted to present at the task force, well, first they commended you for even establishing a task force like that. That was something that they felt was wrong and not happening here. And so it looks like you're leading the way that way relative to that. They had a little bit of an issue, as I said, with the direct link to terrorism. So we'll go with the San Mateo OES and we'll try them relative to that. They said a lot of the courses were basic in nature, and they wanted, if you could find some advanced courses involving terrorism or bomb making or that type of investigative stuff. No, they were looking for more of an advanced level training course.
We'll have fun finding those.
So there you go. Then on April 1st, if you remember in the past that Kerry Weiss, the mayor of Atherton, and myself, working with Cherry Hill, involving the San Bruno incident with the gas leak, our chief pretty much been overseeing this for, gosh, a number of years. And they finally criminally indicted, the federal government did, PG&E because of the negligence of the actual issue relative to that. And I think that's something that hasn't happened here, especially in California. So that's going to be something that I think we need to watch. And I think when we were talking about those crossovers with those water lines, with some of those gas lines, I think we need to watch that since now they've been criminally indicted. That may be something for us to assist Steve Wagstack's office, which is the DEA and the FBI relative to that. Also, let's see here. I want to thank you, Chief, for the setting up that the information relative to the disaster over in Washington, and giving us all those updates and everything. That was really good because the contacts that I have back in DHS, and we hooked you up with those leadership briefings so that you get the full picture of the whole thing. And since we are contributing people to that disaster, and you're the chief, you should have the accessibility to those things. And I think they pretty much gave it to you pretty fast turnaround time.
Good, one day.
Great. And Virginia just mentioned about the policy manual with the updates. And I have made a request at our special session that we look into, since we're down so many of the management positions, that we provide you with some type of administrative support to help you prepare some of these things and some of these tasks that we've had you do since you don't have a deputy chief. We have an HR manager. We're presently trying to find a manager of administration, right?
Correct.
And a lot of the tasks that you're doing as the PIO, maybe should be delegated. So I think I had asked for that to be put on the agenda, that we look at that. Maybe not a full-time position, maybe a contractor position for a few months until we fill that actual position. So that's all I have to say.
Let me ask this, do you need an assistant?
Actually, John isn't my assistant on paper, but John does a great job of assisting me all the time.
Great comment.
Is that sufficient?
I think to Director Solano's point, the faster we can fill some of these positions, which Jenny's trying to do, the faster we take some of the pressure off. Because Susan's on vapors for time, but we're getting close to filling her position, and Jenny's moving forward with the other hires. So we'll see. I mean, we're doing different things. We had a support person working for John, and now that's changing out. And we just interviewed some people there. We had some people in fire prevention working on the Knox Box project. There's some changes there. So there's some new people coming on board, but they're at more of the task level right now.
So back to my original question, is that something that we want to look at?
I wouldn't mind that we look at it. I think, it depends on right now John's bandwidth. I mean, the more help we can give John, the easier it is for John to help me without feeling overburdened.
Okay.
Because, to bring someone on specifically that doesn't know the ropes around here is very difficult.
Yeah.
John's intuitive to everything that goes on, as you saw today with the promotional ceremony where he picked up and
Okay.
got it all organized. So.
Put it on the May agenda. Thanks. Any other reports, requests?
It's a request. You asked me, and I wasn't sure which items you were talking about, you asked me if I wanted certain things on the next agenda that I had mentioned, and
You had sent an email to Susan that was passed on to us.
okay. Well, let me tell you, I want to follow up from when we had our goals meeting. I would like to have a discussion of pension plan alternatives, and I'd like to do it at the next meeting. My recommendation, since there's no motion on the table or even information, that it be a study session, but I know that some people feel uncomfortable on a study session. But I would just like to have a session where we could invite some people who are knowledgeable about this. I can think of perhaps 2, maybe 3, and maybe someone from the district could present, maybe somebody from the firefighters. I don't know, wherever we could get some information that would be helpful for us, just as background information.
Do you want to put that as an agenda item for May?
Yes, I would like to. So that's my request. And my suggestion, but again, it's just a suggestion, is that it be a study session item, starting at, say, I think we could use at least a half hour, maybe even an hour, to just hear from people who could have some suggestions. I'm thinking, for example, that there are people in Menlo Park who did the pension reform. There's also perhaps somebody from Mayor Reed's office who could come and address us. That they're just a couple of knowledgeable people.
So you're talking about a special or a study session outside of the regular board meeting?
Yes, because I don't think we would want to take action or anything at the next meeting.
Well, if it's a special or if it's a study session, you can't take it.
That's why I'm recommending that no action is contemplated at this point. It would just be background.
So let me understand, you want this put on the next agenda to set a date.
No, I'd like to discuss it,
Okay.
but not with a motion in mind. In other words, I just
Goes
like.
on the agenda as a report item,
Okay.
and then we get whatever input anybody wants to put on the table, and we discuss it without an end point in terms of a motion.
That's correct.
Okay. I think we can get that on the main agenda. Good. Anything else?
Could I ask, I'm sorry, could I ask, Susan, do you remember what other items I asked for? And I don't have the email with.
It's
Oh.
the pension I'm remembering specifically. I can't off the top of my head remember what the other one was.
Okay.
But there was another one, you're right.
Yeah, the other thing that you've been concerned about is sort of taking a longer term view of where we want to be, et cetera. I'm not sure
Like a
how
vision.
you want to describe that, but.
Yeah, I was gonna say this idea of a visioning thing, this idea of where do we see the district in 20 years or something, I think that would be, again, a good discussion. I don't know that we need outside expertise, but I could see that also being something we might do a little bit earlier, like starting at 6 o'clock, and we discussed that list of, it was in table F or whatever it was in the goals session, there, where all the directors had suggested some goals, some of which were long-term and some were short-term. But we discussed the long-term ones from that list.
And my concern is that we get agendas which are simply not manageable in our general time frame.
Right.
And Chuck, what I would suggest is that we say, okay, in the May meeting, we'll allocate some time to talk about pension. And then maybe June or July, we'll allocate some time to talk about that other issue. Because we've got a lot of near-term things we've got to deal with. And if we're looking out 20 years, whether we do it in May or June, I don't think makes a whole lot of difference.
Well, I agree with the point that you're making. The only thing where I would disagree, and this relates to potential discussion at some point of a contract, would be the state report, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but the state report on personnel requirements for firefighters. You know what I'm talking about? It's
You mean firefighters bill of rights?
No. This was the thing that, there was a state recommendation, it's dated from, I think it's 2012 or something like that, that talked about what training and background firefighters should have. Blueprint 2020, was that what it was called?
It was in 2012.
2012?
2020, you're right.
I think it's called Blueprint 2020. And it's I don't know, it's maybe a half-inch thick. It's a discussion of what everybody should have and what kind of background. I think it's very powerful stuff as we begin to talk about what we would want our employees to have for the future, and it relates to contracts. So I agree with Peter, it's not pie in the sky like, what do we want our stations to look like 20 years from now? It's talking about what kind of training do we want new hires to have now, because they'll be here in 20 years doing this stuff. So
Is that the NFPA standard?
No, it was a state, California state. Blueprint 2020 came from California. It's not the federal recommendation.
I think though it derived from the federal recommendations. They came first and this came afterward. And it was the recommendations for what kind of education, what kind of training they should have.
I think right now, the majority of our firefighters and engineers and officers and captains are pretty close to what the Blueprint 2020 is recommending as far as state and training curriculum.
What about just simply circulating that document to the board? Find it and circulate
Oh,
it.
I have it. I'd be happy to circulate it.
I think that would be useful.
Could you?
But sure, but I'm just saying to you, I think a discussion of, let me say, I'll add another one to the list, and I think we need to do it in the near term, that what requirements and training incentives we want to have with respect to both national and state standards.
Well, I think what we just heard is that to a large degree we meet those standards.
We already
For
got it.
certain levels, not every level in our fire department. So you want to discuss this, if you're going to discuss this, I mean, there's more than just firefighters, engineers, and captains in this organization. You also have battalion chiefs, division chiefs, possibly deputy chiefs, and fire chiefs, which that document talks to. And then you're talking also about national, like NFPA, adopting an FPA, a whole new other standards for our organization.
I didn't say, I just said that the state standards came from the federal standards, so they've kind of filtered down. I think it's the state one that's more important.
Yeah, I personally, based on just listening to this conversation, I think it's premature to do very much, because I'm not well informed. And I don't want us to spend a lot of our time in a board meeting trying to get informed.
Well, where else would we get informed on that?
Oh, we do our homework, you
Okay,
know, and I've asked you to send out the report,
I will do that.
digitally, I hope.
Yep.
And if there are other things that the staff thinks that we ought to, and then we can talk about what are the particular issues. I'm really uncomfortable having a generic conversation, because it takes time, and it means other things don't get done.
Well, we can certainly don't have to have it in May, so I'll agree. Let me be clear, I will digitally send it to Rex and let him disperse it from there, just, you know.
Well, I think send it out. If
I'm not
board
going to send it
members
to each
say,
individual member, because we've already said that we're not to do that. So I will send it to you
Well,
and to the chief, and then let them.
and he can send it. But board members take a look at it. If you've got questions or you think it's something that we need to look at later on, then later on down the line, we can have a study session, a special session, or whatever to take a look at that, talk about some of the concerns that you might have, or that as a whole we might have. But for the most part, I know there are guys right now who pretty much comply with everything.
Look, I'm not making any complaints about anybody. I'm just talking, and I'm not talking about anything that affects anybody who's currently employed or any of that. I'm just saying that we ought to at least be knowledgeable when we start to talk about what incentives we have in the contract for training. We ought to at least be knowledgeable about what kinds of training we might be talking about. And this document covers that.
Okay. Anything else on reports and requests? Okay. Liaison reports. Menlo Park.
I have the agenda for the April 1st meeting, but the April 29th meeting agenda is not out yet. I've inquired, I haven't heard if it's on the agenda, so I don't know anything more. But there are two things that are supposed to be, now one thing that's supposed to be there and one thing that could be there. What's supposed to be there is something that relates to some excess property in Menlo Park adjacent to a station. And the second piece is the adoption of the fire code. And at this point, I don't know.
I followed with the city manager today, I've not heard back.
Okay. The other thing, East Palo Alto. I just looked at, in the chief's report, there is liaison notes. It's kind of some of the things that he feels are important for the liaisons to talk to people in East Palo Alto, whether it be the mayor, the city manager, whoever. Be familiar with those. It kind of makes a request. It's on page 3 of the chief's report. Anything from Atherton from liaisons?
Yes, I've discussed with the chief the question about El Camino. Atherton is considering alternatives to the current 6-lane structure of El Camino. And it's my intention to go to the town council meeting tomorrow night and in public comment period to simply say, we want you to know the fire district's very concerned about anything that would adversely affect the traffic patterns on El Camino because of being able to respond from Station 6, Station 3, Station 4, Station 5. If they constrict El Camino, that traffic is just going to simply go over to the Alameda, it's going to cover the Middlefield, and we're going to end up with a much more difficult time moving north and south within the district. So I just want to alert them before they get too far down that road that we have some serious concerns and want to be involved in those discussions.
Good. San Mateo County, and we have 2 of those. One of them for District 3 and District 4.
I don't have anything from District 3.
I spoke to Warren Slope, chief of staff, Darcy, and they're very interested in following the state of Washington situation. And after it's over, they want to probably compile some type of a proclamation for the board of supervisors. And they'll get with you and your staff, and you can prepare the information that they need. So.
And there's photos on our website now. So
The other thing,
we'll just put those out there.
the other thing is that in his chief's report. Supposedly, the code ordinances are supposed to come up in April or early May. For the county boards.
Ron is what, April 21st for the county?
Is that Tuesday?
22nd.
22nd, the 22nd.
So that's the latest.
Yes.
Okay.
There's a date certain.
Rob?
Yeah, I was wondering.
The other thing that I would encourage, you really are plugged into these people well. I would just encourage us to use this as a lessons learned opportunity. And when the people come back, give them the opportunity to present to appropriate people within the county. We've got some interesting terrain in this county, which I think is equally slide prone. And are we doing as much as we need to do? And the U.S. Geological Survey has mapped it all out, and you know just exactly where these places are. You look at what the state of Washington did, and this is an area where they had slide after slide after slide. You know, and they kept issuing building permits, and they kept just going right at it. And so there must be some lessons learned that we can take out of that and look at it from a county-wide basis. I don't think within the district we've got much of that slope instability.
Actually, Sharon Heights has a lot of slope
See on
instability.
Station 4.
Yeah, but it's not.
It does?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, then we ought to use that, this as an opportunity to sensitize people to those.
I mean, it's not to the degree of what you saw in Washington, but I think in this county, to that degree, Love Creek, if you remember that some years ago, in fact, Carl Custom, who's on the USAR team, responded in the Boulder Creek area to that event, and actually we put him on the radio to talk about Washington at some point, because he was one of the only members that had, at the time, that background. So it's happened before in the county. It hasn't happened, I agree, in Menlo Park, but Sharon Heights has issues.
So Harold, I have a question. I did notice that you have the annexation of Weekend Acres.
Correct.
So last
I'll never
time-
give up.
No, that's fine, but for a while we put it on hold because I
Right.
didn't really, I mean, I was talking to Don Horsley and Dave and Ryan and Warren about it right after Warren was elected. I mean, I can easily resume those talks with at least Dave.
Yeah, I think we're gonna need to, I mean, it's up to the board, we're gonna need to get an answer at some point. There's 100 lots, of which I think 92 have homes on them in there that are not in the district where we provide the primary service to those
Okay.
homes.
So we'll resume them, just for a while they were.
And they had the measure passed, so the county now has budget bucks, if you will,
Right.
which before was kind of the crux of where it wasn't going
Yeah.
because it was the height of the economic decline.
Yeah, okay. We'll resume that.
Rex, have we
Thanks.
gone on the chief's report, or are we still on the?
No, we're just finishing up the liaisons. Now we're on the chief's report.
We're happy to answer any
Are
questions.
there any questions?
Oh, I think I skipped to the Sorry.
Station 2.
Yes, sir.
Have we got the answer to the earthquake spec question yet?
We have an answer. John talked to the architects at the time. I want to say the answer was to about a 9 seismic. They don't like the question, just so you know.
There's a lot of factors with that question.
What kind of earthquake, et cetera?
Duration, where's the epicenter?
Let me preface it for everybody. We're talking about the communications tower. Director Carpenter asked the question, to what level of an earthquake would that tower out there that was built in phase 1 be resilient? I guess is the best way to put it.
So when I asked the architects that question, they deferred to the manufacturer of the monopole, who then gave us a very confusing response. But basically what they said is when they designed a tower of that size, or a pole of that size, there's 2 factors that come into play. There's earthquakes that they look at, and they also look at wind shear. In this situation, the wind shear ratio was a higher concern than the earthquake ratio. So they built it to a higher degree than what code requires for a pole to be built to for seismic standards. With that said, that's good, but it doesn't answer the question. So I requested additional information, and our architect was reading through the codes and whatnot, and their basic response was it could withstand approximately a 9 to a 10. But they were not going to put that in writing.
Well, if we have a 9, it's not going to be All of them, because there's a bunch left.
Those are the last things.
It'll be the only thing left. I'm sort of kicking myself because this is not a question we asked ahead of time. And I know, for example, the state has a code for new hospitals as to what level they must meet. And so, as we look at other stations, we probably ought to, early in the discussions, include that with our architects so that we have some idea of what it is. And I know from my experience at Stanford that it's very interesting when you actually get people in and start looking at the details. It's all often very little inexpensive things that can make a huge difference. The specification on a bolt, or the specification on a tie rod, or something like that. That's typically where the failure points come. It's not on the big pieces of steel. It's on the connection points where, and so at very little additional cost at the front end, you can make it much better. Retrofitting it gets very expensive.
I agree completely with that statement, and those are items that we've been looking at throughout this Fire Station 2 project, and we'll continue that through Fire Station 6. We just actually had almost that exact conversation about some of the roofing that's going on Fire Station 2, and the question was, what kind of bolts are you putting in? Because if you don't put the right bolts in, we're going to have leaks. And we got a satisfactory answer in the sense that there's stainless steel bolts that are going in there, and once they're drilled in, it's going to have a complete seal. Now, if you remove that bolt and you put the bolt back in, you will no longer have that seal, and you'll have to add additional weatherproofing to it. But yes, we are looking into those exact situations.
And somewhat related, and something I think I talked to you about this, but maybe I just thought I did, which happens occasionally. I always have those conversations with my wife, and she said, "No, you just thought about it. You didn't have one." BART has a system in place now where they have they're tied into a seismic system where they get warnings of an earthquake as it occurs.
Right.
And it automatically shuts down the BART system. Would it be possible for us to piggyback on that system so that warnings could go to the stations and they could move the trucks or at least open the doors in that 30 to 60 second
There's
warning
agencies
time?
that have that now.
Pardon?
There are agencies that have that technology now.
Do we have it?
We do not have it. And that's one of the things we actually were looking at one point, because USGS across the street obviously has a lot of experience with these same types of systems. The state was actually trying to pioneer a statewide initiative and using this technology, and I don't believe it's been successful, but it is out there, and there are agencies that do have
At
it.
some future time, perhaps you can just give us a brief report. I don't want to spend any more time on it tonight.
No, it would be very forward-looking to do that.
Any other questions on the chief's report?
I have a comment. And I want to just say this in a positive way because I think the chief does a good job with the budget and financial conservatism and so forth. So it's not a comment, it's a criticism of anything. There was a wording on page 1 at the bottom of the page of the report. You're referring to end of year projects.
Right.
And it's a kind of thinking that I'd like to see us dispense with in a way. And it's saying we've got savings. We didn't spend as much as we thought, so we better hurry up and spend it. And my philosophy is that the district ought to spend whatever it needs to do what it needs to do. And just because we realize the savings doesn't justify a reason to spend. And just because we didn't realize the savings doesn't mean that the project isn't worthwhile. But these projects ought to stand on their own, be justified on their own, and this is the kind of thing that goes on with the federal government and the way they budget and so forth, and I'd like to see us kind of pull it out of here, but it's just a comment on tone. I'm not concerned about any reality there.
Sure. Well, just to give you, I think, a better sense of maybe a little bit more comfort, any one-time funds has to be authorized by the board, so it's not as if it's up to my discretion. We would say to you, these are what we would use these things for. Obviously, going into a budget, there are things every year that occur that aren't within either the normal budget process or something comes up. And that's what this is. One time, this is it, we're not building in internal service dollars. I mean, it could be something unique that we decide came up this year. We need X. But again, to give you some comfort, we wouldn't do that unless the board said, we'll allow you to do that this year, because we're not gonna place all of the funds that were left over, here, here, and here.
And let me just say, I do believe that, and that's not an issue. I can tell you though, when I was a budget consultant in my former life, one of the things that I heard all the time is this use it or lose it philosophy. You got money in your budget, you better spend it, because if you don't spend it, you won't have it the next year. And so every year money got wasted just to be able to preserve a little, and it just was a bad philosophy in my opinion.
And we had that philosophy here. I think, again, give you some comfort. We've gone to more of the whole health, which is ask for what you need, especially over the last several years where, it's been tight at times with what we can allocate for different projects and so forth. We've been very careful. So I think, coming out of that, there wasn't always one-time funds to do things, but there's been some great things that were done. I'll give you one example. We put carbon dioxide detectors on all of the medical bags one year that go into people's homes, because we had a fire crew at, out in the field one time that was not our crew, but another agency, where they were overcome by carbon dioxide poisoning. So it just made sense. There was a suggestion, can we do that? We had one-time funds, we accomplished that. So it made them safer to go into people's homes, especially in the winter time. So, a good question, though.
All right, that brings us to the consent calendar. Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor of approving this consent calendar?
Oh, I'm sorry. The minutes are on the consent calendar, right?
Yes.
I just have a correction to them, so
You can do that now.
Can I pull it off?
No, you can do it right now, I think.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
we haven't voted yet, so you can do it.
Yeah, I thought we had to pull the things off first.
Well, no.
Okay.
So we're gonna have a big discussion,
Well, not
correction, folks.
Yeah, just a correction, you could just.
Okay, well, this is, I'm protecting you here, Peter, because
Oh, thank you.
your quoted is swearing here. So if you look on the bottom of page 9, the last paragraph, they talk about, yeah, it's talking about water over the dam, D-A-M-N.
Instead of DAM.
Oh,
Maybe Peter meant it the other way.
Can we amend those, John?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Give me 1 second more, I'm sorry. I don't have any other, issue.
Okay. So motion on the floor to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. So that brings us to our regular agenda. We've already discussed item 14. Item 15, consider and approve a resolution declaring unabated seasonal weed as a nuisance, public nuisance. And I believe that belongs to you.
Yes, it does. You were just supposed to say move approval, that's all. Every year, we survey the district and send out weed abatement notices to property owners to let them know that their weeds need to be cut. We give them a deadline of June 1st to do this, and if they feel that their weeds are not a public nuisance, we give them the opportunity at the main meeting to come in and hold a public hearing and discuss their findings, which has happened a few times. Other than that, if this goes forward, we'll be sending out the letters, letting the property owners know that they need to cut their weeds within the next week.
I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Discussion?
Is this what you do every single year?
Yes.
Yeah.
And how did you pick out these sites that are listed here?
by driving in the district and surveying and finding them. Some of them have come over the years from complaints from neighbors or something like that, but yeah, take a look. Most of them are unimproved lots.
The only reason I was mentioning this, and I must say, I raced to look to see if I could find my address on here and so forth, is, I mean, normally, and this is something I have to do up in the mountains as well, you're still getting rain in March and even early April. So most people, when they want to do weed abatement, don't do it until later because you want to do it once and for all. And I guess my question is there any possibility that we could push this a little bit later so that we don't have quite so many locations here that get notices?
Not really, and you'll see this as the progression goes on. I have to get my budget and everything and the cost for the weed abatement contractor into the county tax assessor's office by the end of July. And all of the steps along the way have to be by a public meeting like this. So in order for me to start the process, now is the time to do it. We give them a public hearing in May. In June, we send out the contractor because they haven't cut it by June 1st. So, and that's about the time everything starts to dry out, so we want to get everything cut just prior to fire season or before it gets off the ground. And by the end of June, I will have what we need to charge these people, and that comes forward at the July meeting. And after the July meeting, I have to send a copy of your resolution to the county tax assessor's office. So it all has to happen simultaneously.
Because they actually charge them through the property tax?
Yes.
But when are the weeds actually cut?
June, the month of June.
So they've been cut by the time you send the notice? The weeds have been cut? By the time, I'm sorry, the notice, the tax, putting down the tax has happened after you've spent the money?
Yes.
And could you just tell me kind of what, I know the lots are different sizes, but what's an average weed abatement cost in terms of?
Somewhere around $200, $200 to $300.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
It's much cheaper in Colorado.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay. You got it. 16, consider adopt a resolution approving revisions to the district's purchasing and contracting procedures and authorities administrative directive.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Yeah.
On some of the limits, I was looking, I saw, and I'm referring to on Exhibit 1 that talks about exceptions to the bidding process in case of an emergency. I just thought maybe 3/5 would be in order to help you out in case you can't find any of us or a few of us are dead. Is there any statutory regulation that says we need 4/5?
The 4/5 is a requirement of the Public Contracts Code, the
Okay,
state code.
thank you. Okay, well then we'll have to leave it in. And then under D, since it's a natural disaster, I put it from 5,000 to give you as the head 150,000. And is that also limited by the public statute ordinance or law?
I think that's local discretion.
You're proposing that be 150
Yeah.
instead of 50?
Instead of 5.
It's only 5,000.
That actually didn't apply to the emergency purchases. That only applied to sole sourcing.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Okay. I take that back. I'm sorry. I thought it was part of the thing. And then on the next page, where it talks about the purchasing contracts, the following purchase shall be authorized to be purchasing or contracting authority. It says any amount less than 50. I'm going to have to raise that for the chief to 150, the deputy chief to 100,000, division chiefs or fire marshal of 50,000, battalion chiefs, mid-managers to 25, USAR grant specialist firefighters assigned to a facility purchasing 10,000, captain, senior inspectors, emergency service specialists, mechanics, clerks of the board, firefighters assigned 5,000. I wanted to bump that up. Is there any statutory?
Well, there's no statutory limitation that I know of, Matt.
Not that I know of either, but I have not looked at that.
And I think that the reason that they're at the levels that they are is that experience has told us that these are fairly reasonable levels. And, you know, I'm not going to speak for the fire chief, but I would be reluctant to raise any of the amounts under the fire chief for sure without his, I mean, it's his, he's ultimately responsible. So to you for those limits.
I'm actually very comfortable. I was a little bit uncomfortable, but I understand the flexibility. I'm actually fine with these limits. At first, like I said, I was a little uncomfortable. Like they were maybe too high for position under the chief.
I mean, we don't actually come to you all that often,
Right.
if you think about it, for
Right.
things over 50,000. They're more the exception than
Then the
than the
rule.
rule.
I was just going through the federal code, purchasing department heads in a division. I usually have up to 250. So I didn't want to go that high, but I know in the federal government it goes as high as 250. So I thought 150.
You know how much money they spend.
Well, that's true.
But under the CalCARD program that's administered by the Department of General Services for the state of California, this is very consistent with what, like,
Okay.
for the
Well, that's
state,
fine.
what a department head would be allowed to do, what a mid-manager would be allowed to do. And since DGS is who administers the CalCARD, it would be probably the best practice to be consistent with what DGS.
No, that's fine.
recommends.
I didn't know that there were some standards that were set relative to that.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry to.
Susan, could you just describe, I guess I'm not understanding the process here. It seems like there's an emergency, the chief can do something, and then you try to go to the board and get authorization. And what happens if the board doesn't get it for a fix? I don't understand how this works.
My understanding, Director, was that you already have, and John, you might know this better than I do since Steve worked with you on this language. You already have all of the language here that is not bolded. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So the changes in A, this is an already existing policy, the changes in A have been made specifically to give more flexibility so that the fire chief can make decisions in an emergency. So he's been added, the fire chief has been added here. Whereas before, currently, unless you approve these changes, in an emergency, you would have to get a 4/5 approval of the board, as opposed to if you make these changes, the fire chief would be able to make those decisions.
But I'm not against this or anything. I mean, when we vote on this, we're essentially authorizing it de novo, I think, right? We're not just authorizing the changes.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're authorizing the whole
The whole thing.
Yeah, the whole
And I'd like
policy.
to know what I'm voting on. I guess I don't understand, if he's authorized to buy stuff and the board suddenly says, no, you shouldn't have bought it, I don't understand what happens, what's the standoff there? I mean,
Well, the current policy restricts it. This just gives him the ability to do that.
And what I, in my experience with other organizations, is that in situations like this, the governing body is called upon to ratify the action that was taken by the chief. You're technically correct. You know, the governing body could say, no, we're not going to ratify it. The fact is, it's an expense that's been incurred. It's an obligation that's been incurred. You can't undo that. But I think it would be wrong to give him the authority to do it without having it be subject to later ratification by the board, because we have to stay in the loop. And so, worst case, we'd have a discussion and we'd say, hey chief, we think you really screwed up, but you incurred an obligation on our part and we're going to honor that obligation.
what I'm troubled by, which, in other words, we can authorize him to do something right now with a 3/5 majority. This is saying if he does something in an emergency that's pre-authorized, now he needs a 4/5 majority. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah,
Matt?
It's a public code.
It just
Yeah.
does. You give him the authorization to spend during an emergency, and then you go back and you ratify the fact that he's authorized to do it.
Yeah, it just doesn't sound, I don't mean to stand in the way, but it doesn't sound right here. There's something wrong with the
Well, that's why
code.
I proposed it, but
I'm agreeing with you.
No, but that's why, Susan said that there's a statutory requirement.
But an emergency, just,
Well, I
Well,
think maybe
yeah.
like,
It
what
goes
would you?
for-
there's
I
some
had-
misunderstanding
I had
here, because
this-
this can't be this way. I
Well,
mean,
it can be this way, and we try to explain it, and Matt double check me here. The bolded language is the new language. In the old language, the board could do it by a 4/5 vote. In the new language, the fire chief can do it unilaterally. Period. Then, it must come back to the board for ratification. It doesn't say anything under the ratification clause about 4/5 or 3/5. It just says it comes back for ratification.
Right.
So there's two separate ways we can make emergency expenditures. We can make it as a board by a 4/5 vote, that's the existing rule. Or the board can, or the chief can do it unilaterally, but it then has to come back to us for ratification. Under the normal rules of this board, ratification is a majority vote, which is 3 out of 5.
So, but why are we limited to require, I mean, if there's an emergency, we want to vote on something, why do we have to have 4/5 all of a sudden?
Well,
Well, not get us all together.
I think the reason for that is that the concern for prior notice, public discussion, et cetera, et cetera. There are provisions in the Brown Act for emergency actions by the board. John, you may have a better answer.
Well, when you're taking emergency action, you're basically saying you're not necessarily going out for bid, you're not following the entire purchasing policy document. In doing so, you're kind of opening up the window for somebody to later on come back and say, well, you didn't follow the process. Public contract code says if you're gonna not follow that process and it is an emergency purchase, then you're gonna require 4/5 vote. In this situation, we are amending that language to allow the fire chief to make that decision instead of trying to hold a board meeting when we're in the middle of an emergency. Hopefully that helped a little bit.
Yeah,
I
that's,
get
I'm
that.
reading the
My
code section.
question is,
Exactly
what
it
would
says.
you consider an emergency situation? I'm looking at number 2, under the emergency purchasing authority, the fire chief can waive obtaining competitive bids. I get that. What,
We have
for my
we have a
edification-
windstorm and there's damage to a station that's gonna require $100,000 worth of repair to the roof of the station. We find one vendor that's still working, they're
It's
willing to
still
come out,
business.
willing to put the roof on, and we're done.
Okay.
Something like that, right? Or a vehicle crashes into a fire station, and we need to get the station back up and running. Can we make emergency repairs? Yes.
So
See, one of the most restrictive laws is the Brown Act. And the Brown Act, I think very wisely, does not define emergency. It says you can hold an emergency meeting, and these are the ways you have to do to hold an emergency meeting. But it doesn't have a big definition of what an emergency is.
Right, that is a discretion.
And it has to be a discretionary thing. And when you use your emergency authority, as John suggests, you're held to a higher standard.
As you saw recently with a vendor that came in and was concerned that he didn't get the bid for traffic preemption. So it does happen. But vendors don't like when they don't get the bid.
Anything else on this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay. 16. 17. Consider and adopt a resolution approving an increase to the general fund revenue budget to reflect the educational and the ERAF rebate. I'm going to let Susan explain that.
Well, every year, for a number of years now, dating back to the 1990s, the county controller retains a portion of each local agency's property tax funds, and they go into the educational Augmentation, Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund, ERAF. And that was done to supplant the state general fund share of what had to go to schools. In years when schools in certain counties meet their basic constitutionally defined aid limit, not all the ERAF funds are needed, and so they're rebated back to the agencies from which they were taken in the first place. I think there are only like 6 counties out of the 58 in the state that actually have schools that are at sufficient funding levels where there are rebates, and San Mateo County is one of them. So we do get, the district does get a rebate of these ERAF funds every year because our schools don't necessarily need the funds that have been taken from the district in the first place. A couple of years ago, district staff was cautioned by the county controller that because of some changes in the state budget, that these funds may not be guaranteed forever and that we should treat them each year as one time in nature. And so we have done that since the 12-13 budget. We recently got our check for the last couple of months. We did get a check from the county controller for almost $2.9 million in rebate funds for the current year. And the recommendation to the board from the staff is that you go ahead and increase the general fund revenue budget by that amount of funds. You also increase the transfers out of the general fund to the capital improvement fund by the same amount, and you earmark this money for the Station 6 capital improvement project. So that's what's before you.
So, in terms of, like Station 6 has had some.
I want to put a motion on the floor.
Oh, sorry, I thought they wanted, I'll move to accept this.
Okay, now discuss.
Sorry, Rex. Where are we? Station 6 is just.
There's another item that's coming up on that.
I know, but I mean, is this the best place to put the one-time fund? Is there another place like?
Yeah, because then it would
It's your second
Well,
highest
that's true,
priority.
be completely funded, so.
Correct.
I mean, that would, it's just the timing, I guess. It's just frustrating, Station 6 is very frustrating.
Let me ask you something, Susan, just, I mean, again, this is fine with me, but if these budget changes that you're gonna propose, that you're proposing were in place, we wouldn't be doing this, is that correct? One, we would have already funded the capital improvement fully?
No, not necessarily. The capital improvement fund, even under what I'm recommending, according to generally accepted accounting principles, would still be its own separate fund, separate from the general fund. And the way that you would fund it would be with transfers from the general fund.
I thought one of your recommendations was to only, to fund fully every capital project before it was approved.
I think the way the policy reads is each phase. So that each phase, right.
I apologize.
Yeah. Because you may not know until you get into the design phase how much the full project's going to cost, so you would do it on a phase basis.
Any other questions?
But let me follow up with, so, but if it were fully funded, say already, all we'd be doing is taking this money into the general fund, is that correct?
That's right. If Station 6 had $9 million set aside for it already, then you would be sitting here tonight deciding whether you wanted it just to roll into the general fund balance for future allocation, or there was some other need that you wanted to designate it for.
So here's my question then, do we really have to vote on getting more money? I mean, is that required?
Well, the way that you currently adopt your budget is through a resolution that you adopt in June, and there's one resolution for the revenue budget. This is not a budgeted item because we consider it one time. So in order to keep your books in balance, if you will, so that at the end of the year you're not left with huge variances that you have to explain in the year-end closing process, you do adopt changes to the revenue budget as well as to the expenditure budget. I've never seen it done anywhere else like this, I have to admit.
Oh, okay, so it's unusual. I mean, I'm sort of saying, why are we doing all this stuff? But
I mean, we also, in September, come back and ask you to change all the appropriations as of June 30th of the prior year, and then there aren't any variances when the capital comes out. It's another practice that's kind of a little strange.
And which we're gonna come to in item 20 is.
Yeah.
So, okay.
But right now, this is the way.
This is what we're doing, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I have some significant concerns about transferring these funds to the Station 6 capital improvement account. And the reason is that I am very disturbed about the manner in the way the city of Menlo Park has dealt with Station 6. They are now requiring us to do an environmental assessment. They're dragging this thing on forever and forever and forever. And I don't think it's in the best interest of this district to continue to waste staff time and effort on Station 6 until such time as the city of Menlo Park understands that it's in their interest to have this station improved. Alternatively, if we feel it's very important to move forward with Station 6, I would recommend that we remove the generator, we remove the fuel tank, we remove the historic building from the plan, and we make it a plain vanilla project and ask them to approve it without any environmental assessments and without all this rigmarole. It makes no sense.
Those are my concerns. I gotta be honest, that's why I have right here, timing of Station 6.
Can we put it on the main agenda?
Where are we
Can we
with
put
the
it on the
timing
main
of this
agenda
project?
so that we can have a discussion, I haven't voted on it, we go forward with it?
Well, we certainly can, but we're now being asked to put more money in
Into
this
the
pot.
project, right.
And I think that symbolically, that's a very wrong thing to do. I'm not even sure that a board action at the May meeting is necessarily the way to go. Because this talks about Station 6, we can talk about Station 6 under this agenda item. You know, my preference is to give strong direction to the chief to go back to the city of Menlo Park and say, look, you know, we're just not going to move forward playing the game the way you want to play it, forcing us to do this environmental assessment and everything else. If what you're concerned about is the generator and the fuel tank and the historic building, we're taking them off the table. And will you be prepared to move forward? Because if you're not, you know, then we're going to spend our money someplace else. And if they say, oh no, but we really need a generator there, then we say, well, then, you know, get out of the way. We have been Mr. Nice Guy on this one, and I think the time has come. I think the time has come to instruct the chief to draw the line and say, hey, my board will not put additional money on this project unless we have assurances that we can move forward.
A nice line, Harold. I gotta agree, I mean, it's just been fraught with challenges with the city. And is this the best way to put 2.9 million, into this?
Yeah, one way to affect that is I could make a motion to table until such time as the chief reports back to us on this issue.
I'll second that.
I said I could, I want to.
But I would second that.
But then the ERAF funds would be where?
Yeah,
In the
general
general fund or the?
The ERAF funds would remain, they're already deposited into the general fund, they would just remain.
They would just.
They would remain there. So if we table this, we're basically giving him a message that the board said, hey, we're not going to put more money on that until you guys will decide what you want.
Susan, I thought we actually did have to vote to put it into the general fund.
Your revenue budget will be out of balance by the $2.9 million, and when we close the books, there'll be a budget variance of that amount that will need to be explained in the annual financials.
But we can fix all that up before that.
It can be fixed. It can be
If
fixed.
we table this though and come back to it when we get the report from the chief,
There's no
I move to table.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
All right.
End the discussion.
Is the clearance, is the instruction
5-0.
clear?
Sorry.
Clear. I'm not sure it'd be clear on the other end, but
Well, but that's
Have him
again
call
the
me.
problem, that's the problem. That's, and then I know it's a
Chuck's the
continuous
Menlo
problem.
Park
It's
rep.
gotta
Chuck will
be-
go with you.
It's gotta be addressed, I think, almost more head on. I don't even know if we understand where they're really
done with
coming
that.
from. I don't get that feeling from a
We're
negotiation.
done with that one.
Sorry.
It's been tabled.
Sorry.
It's through.
I'm sorry, Rex.
we're coming up to the end where we can have more discussion.
Sorry.
So single audit memorandum, let's see, this would be 18. single audit memorandum of internal controls for fiscal year 2012, 2015.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? And Susan has this one.
I just have the one question, I'm looking for it now, and I don't mean to be, I just want to know what this issue of the $13,000 was or something, where something wasn't reported or somewhere was that. It's one of the management
It
letters.
was corrected. And they signed off on the correction.
No, I don't, I think they said it wasn't in there. Is this an item that was missed? Oh, here it is. It's on required communications, page 10. It's on page 10 of the last letter. And it's the second paragraph under corrected and uncorrected. There's one uncorrected misstatement or something. And again, it's not material, and I'm sure it's not a problem, but I'd just like to ask what it is. On page 10, it's almost the end of the whole report.
It's the second page 10.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, under that part of report on schedule expenditures and.
No, corrected and uncorrected misstatements.
Sorry.
It's almost 2 pages before the end of the whole item.
Oh, here, I see.
Yeah, it's in the middle of the page.
13,552, something not corrected. I just wondered what wasn't corrected.
Oh, here, sorry.
It's my understanding that it was a miscalculation on the depreciation expense schedule, and that it was as compared to a couple of $1 million that had been booked that same year, and that we thought that it was not material.
And does it then get corrected in the
It will be,
subsequent
yes.
fiscal year?
Yeah, it's already been corrected.
I see, just not in this fiscal year.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
I just, not about the report, Rex, but I wanted to ask a question about this auditor. Is this the same auditor that does the board audit? Not the board audit, the district audit?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, this is the district, yeah.
Yep.
Yes, the single audit, auditor, Mason Associates, does the full district audit in addition to the single audit.
And when you have this auditing for 2 different audiences, because we have this audit, we just did this audit because it's for the federal government, basically.
Well, we have to do the single audit, the memorandum on internal control would be done anyway.
Right.
For the district. The single audit's done anytime we have $300,000 or more in federal money that passes through us, which is every year because of USAR.
And do they, in your experience, do you typically use the same, it would be a lot less money to use the same auditor?
Yeah, you do, because they're already familiar. They've already, in essence, gone through part of the USAR expenditures anyway. Now they're just doing one single audit report, so it's, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
it's
this
much
is
more-
a normal
much more
procedure?
efficient.
The district is doing it normal
Mhm,
procedure?
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, on number 19, I don't know, I'm not sure where to go with that since we.
Well, I think now we can have the discussion, so, be happy to answer, and John's here as well, who works in depth with me on these issues. And Station, be happy to discuss Station 2 or Station 6, which is, I think, the flavor of the day. Any questions on Station 2? Everything's,
I mean, I know we're rolling along.
we're rolling,
Pretty much on schedule.
we're slightly ahead of schedule right now.
Yeah, we're doing good. We're expected to be done early 2015,
So that's,
We say early 2015.
January, February at the latest.
Because when I talked to them on site at groundbreaking, they said they're going to be finished by the end of this year.
Well, that's our goal, but I'm
Okay.
giving myself a little cushion.
It's okay to hedge your
You're
bets.
smart, John.
John is being pessimistic here.
That's that table back there.
I have experience with Station 6. I'm being pessimistic. So.
Yeah, so can we talk about Station 6
Yeah.
for a second?
we'll talk about it. I mean, I think, John John's been discussing what the revisions to the schedule could be. As you know, when I did my last report last month, we're looking at 2 years, and Director Carpenter's correct that the EIR issue it's a real issue. It's an issue that we believe will take up to 6 months. The city was unhappy because they're the ones that have to commission the EIR with the vendor that the price, I guess, that they first got, so they went back to the drawing board. And I'll let John take it from there because there's several issues in scheduling. One, there's some positives, I think, in looking at it again, that I think is good news. And then there's the city part, which, we can't, my only concern with, I think, what your direction has been is that I don't know that the city cares what we do. They have so many projects. We did rush to get it in the pipeline because there is that much work in the pipeline. So I'm not sure, philosophically, I think, we're making a statement, making a stand. I'm not sure they're going to really be impressed or pay attention to it. That's a concern.
They want the headline that the city turns down.
And I'm sure they'll have an argument to that. So I'll let John tell you what we already do.
For me, it's not even about that, it's not really what I want to put to that other correspondence. If we're not gonna get anywhere, it sounds like we're not getting anywhere.
Well, we're getting somewhere, but we're not getting anywhere fast, so.
It's gonna be, another year to 2 years at a time?
Well, hold on, because that's the revised timeline. John can answer that one because we've been grinding the schedule down.
So there's a few things that are currently going on with the Fire Station 6 project, and I'll try to talk to each. The first thing is the district is currently requesting changes to the current plan, and those changes will take some time. We're expecting to take approximately 2 to 3 months to make all the revisions that the fire chief has decided to move forward with. So that is a potential delay. However, that delay is pretty much non-existent because of the environmental report that the City of Menlo Park is requiring us to have conducted. That process is a 6-month process. So even though we have 3 months worth of revisions that we have to do, we'll still be done with those revisions before the environmental report process is finalized. Talking about the environmental report, it's not an EIR, as unfortunately we all keep saying. It's just an environmental review. Most construction projects that are commercial in nature require some sort of environmental review process. In our situation, the city, and it is at the city's determination, that the Fire Station 6 would be a mitigated neg deck environmental review. Basically what that means is they're anticipating that they've identified certain problems with the project that need to be reviewed, and most likely out of that review, either there will be no findings, or the findings that they have will have some type of mitigation measures. Mitigation measures in the sense of informing the fire district we have to revise our plans, or come up with some type of measures or programs in order to reduce the impact of the environment. The 5 major categories that they are looking at are air quality and noise caused by construction activities, operations, and generator testing.
So the building next door didn't make any noise, right?
Right.
And it was made out of rubber?
Did the building next door do the same, go through this process?
I am unaware whether they did or did not.
You indicated that there's a new school being built without this process.
Well, in terms of they're asking for a neg deck on the EIR, school for a school. That's the one on Elliott, the old German-American school. That's what they're going to do. Menlo School District is going to ask for a neg deck when they rebuild the school. We've already had some preliminary discussions with the city.
I could be wrong, but I never saw a notice of an environmental assessment for the building next door, which is moved ahead at lightning speed, next door to Station 6.
Correct.
Moved ahead at lightning speed. So we interrupted you.
You're correct. I never received anything. However, typically those notices would go to the property owners. In this situation, it would have gone to the fire chief. And
wasn't here the whole time either.
I can't speak to that. Other items that they're reviewing are the removal of 3 heritage trees, the determination of the old carriage house, determining whether or not it's a historical asset. If it's a historical asset, there's a certain process we would have to go through. And the addition of a fuel
The
tank.
old carriage house.
The station over, the old fire station here on the lot, we would move it from here to there.
Yeah, and if we drop that, that goes off the table, obviously.
Right.
That is correct. So, to your point, if we remove some of these items off the list, it would reduce the amount of information that they would require the consultant to study. However, would that eliminate their requirement? I'm not sure.
Well, I would urge you to ask the question about the building next door. And get and if they were required to do something, get a copy of what they were required to do. Because it did move at lightning speed. And they're gonna be finished with that building while we're still sitting here talking about it.
Bob's got a comment, I know he sits in the meetings at the city. So
Yeah, and it did not move at lightning speed. It's been, I'm gonna say, close to 3+ years to get the ground broken on that 702 Oak Grove. I go in a lot of these construction meetings, and I've tried to help, we've helped John, not tried to help John with the process. The Menlo Park process is extremely painful in a lot of different ways. Taking, from what I've seen, and I'm not into their immediate day-to-day all the time, taking something off of the proposed project is not been a benefit in the past. So I understand the philosophy, believe me, I do. I'm a terrible bureaucrat, and that's what my job is. And going into those meetings, and what they do is, it's called Menlo Park for a reason. And these projects that are not residential in nature right now are not moving. And so they're putting their emphasis on the residential units for the city, and those are moving at lightning speed.
And what about stuff that the city's doing for itself?
And that's where your frustration, I agree with. And it's not for themselves, it's for special projects that they find. Right now, they would love to hear your complaint, the district's complaint, not your complaint, the district's complaint about the projects. It's very frustrating, we understand it, Harold knows very well.
Oh, yeah.
But city staff has asked for additional resources. They have been turned down by council. That was early this last winter. So being turned down by council you're adding fuel to their fire, saying that we need additional help. Everything they're doing besides the planning is all, the majority of it is outsourced now. Third-party plan review, all the way around they can do. I do know by meeting for some discussion that John needed some more information on, that the planner that's working on this project is in favor of it, and it was actually very helpful in trying to keep us moving in that direction. So I'm really just giving you information on a whole and not just our piece.
So what do you think would happen if we sat down with that planner and said, look, we really have to move this project quicker. We're gonna take the heritage site off, we're gonna take the generator site off. Does that make any difference in the way you look at this?
And I'm going to give you Bob Block's opinion, and that is it'd be the same thing as hitting your head on a brick wall. It's no difference.
What did they do with their gym?
That was John Arriaga coming in and getting it done.
Wait a minute. I mean, that's a, see, if we were the
You're
city,
right.
if we were the city fire department, this wouldn't even be a discussion.
It would be. They do go through the same process. So that process that John Arriaga did, and that's probably not fair how I said that, was come in and it was a minor remodel. I brought in a minor remodel. So as that minor remodel started.
Brand new building.
Oh, you're talking about that gym. There's a separate one. So there's one gym, there's a remodel in the rec center, and then there's another gymnasium. So there's 3 of them that went. There's 3 of them that went. And what they did, the new gym was actually, that was a couple years in the process to get that one going. Plus, to get the new gymnasium going. Now, I was talking about the remodel of the other 2 buildings. The remodel of the other 2 buildings were minor when they started them and major when they were completed.
So I recommend the minor when we start and major when we complete.
But it's a new building, so then they're going to go back to the process which starts it from the beginning. So the negative declaration on that is actually a positive when I heard you say that for the district. Because now you can go to 702 Oak Grove and see what they did for that report and put it together, and now it's gonna move forward because you went through their process. If that makes sense.
It's almost like, you know, when you play some of the board games where it says go back.
Yeah.
So my concern is, because Bob hit it right on the nail head, we may think when we pull stuff off the table, it's gonna expedite the program, but as Bob said, you go back, and then you gotta go through the same process all over again, and I don't know
Do you
that it's.
understand what I'm saying? I am not saying take it off the table. I'm saying tell them that this board is concerned about putting any more money into this project because of the very slow pace at which it's progressing through the system. What can they do to suggest ways in which we can move it quicker? And if it's take away the heritage building, and if it's take away the generator and the fuel tank, then I would urge us to consider doing that. You know, it may well be that the planner will look at it and say, hey boy, you just took me off the hook, because now I don't have to deal with those two issues. I can just simply check it off and we can move ahead.
I don't believe that's gonna be your outcome.
Well, I don't know either.
And it can be talked about. The city council actually, when we were there for the first ordinance meeting back in October this year, we had meetings with them. They have a genuine concern of their process that's going on. But their process for commercial buildings are one.
This is not a commercial building.
It is, by definition.
No, it is not, and that's what gets me so upset. This is a public facility.
Which is
This is a public facility, and it should be zone PF, and they won't do it. And if it was zone PF, we wouldn't be having these conversations. And I've been through this before. I spent 4.5 years as a planning commissioner in Palo Alto, and I can absolutely guarantee you that when a PF project comes through, it's treated entirely different than a commercial project. And we are doing a disservice to ourselves by allowing this to be categorized as a commercial project. It's in the public interest, it's public service, it should be a public facility.
But again, going back to your comment, if we were the city, yes, it would be different from that perspective. You are right.
That's a big difference.
There is. You're
We
right.
begged them to make this PF when they did the specific plan, and they refused to do it. You know, I think that they need to be held accountable. I think it's irresponsible. Just absolutely irresponsible.
And I hope you understand that I am not defending them.
No, you're a reporter.
I am not defending.
You're the messenger, I'm not gonna shoot you.
Right. But anyways,
That's
been tried before anyways, but.
He's the guy that goes under the tent. I mean, he lives in, he goes to the meetings.
Yeah.
And I think Bob's point is, I mean, it's not just us, it's a general, unfortunate, to your point, business practice, the way that they approach things. And it is very frustrating.
I don't think that's the way they dealt with the school systems.
The school systems for them are public, so that they have no say on them.
Right, that's the
They have no say on the public schools. And so, right,
That's not even their property, I don't think. I think that's.
some are and some aren't, their properties. But nevertheless, they are not. So the German-American school and that is going to be a different animal. German-American school is looking outside of the city limits now because they cannot get done what they need to get done in a 2-year cycle through Menlo Park. So they are no longer looking in Menlo Park for a building that they can get their students into.
But the school district is gonna redo that site.
The school district is.
And you're right, the school district is exempt from it.
They're gonna go DSA,
Their state.
Department of State Architect.
So let me ask you this, Chief.
Sir? Yes, Mr.
You have any
President.
do we just stay the course? Or what kind of recommendations do you think?
I would recommend this. We need a little bit more time in terms of dealing with an architect issue that's referenced in here. We think, we have an architect that's worked with the city of Menlo Park on these issues, actually came recommended at one point by the city of Menlo Park, and we've had good success moving other projects through the city of Menlo Park because this individual has a great rapport and reputation with the city, the planners and so forth. And so, and his name's Bill Gutzel. And he knows, I think, how to finesse, to Director Carpenter's point, how to finesse the project. That's who John's been in discussion with in regards to how can we take the schedule, because I was very concerned, as you were, in the last meeting. I don't like to tell you that it's 2 years. I mean, it seems ridiculous. We believe we can shave time. I don't want to say significant time, because then I'll come back and it won't be true, but time off of the 2-year schedule with this individual going back to the city and attempting to work a different way through the process.
Correct.
So we would ask just to be able to do that, and then we can report back. Or we can even have Bill come here and present to the board and let you know what the difference in approach would be.
What is your sense of what they're gonna allow us to do as a temporary station? The last time we raised the temporary station issue, they wanted us to spend $400,000 to take the automobile dealership and upgrade it to the handicap standard.
Yeah.
I mean, are we gonna go through that kind of horse shit again?
I hope not. And I think at this point, we're hearing that we could use the existing facility, but that's where Bill comes in to get that ironclad, because that's an important part. For us, the issue is gonna be as Station 2 gets completed in timing, it would be nice to use the exact same structure that's out there temporarily, both of them, for the engine company and for the firefighters, and just move it to the lot at Station 6, where the house is currently, so the back of that. So we can maintain the same operations off the existing location, like we're doing at Station 2.
So Harold, so there were, previous presentations on like the well that they, or the water well or whatever that was
Right.
on this. I mean, is there anything that we can do?
We've tried to shave all those things off of this because, to the director's point, we don't want to overcomplicate what was going on, create additional delays, so we've stayed just with what we started with. And the one point John made, there is, we've created a little bit of a delay, and I'll take the hit for that, because when I came back, we have a station review team. And so we made sure that the firefighters had looked at the station to make sure it was efficient the way it was designed. Again, when we put this in the pipeline before I got hurt, we were rushing to get it in the system because we were told, get it in the system, get it in the system. So we had to make some corrections in those design elements, which are gonna take a little bit of time. Not much, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't just putting a station out there and then we found out we built it and the firefighters weren't satisfied with, its operation because it was designed incorrectly. So we're making some adjustments there. That'll take a little bit of time. But again, we think the answer is gonna be Bill, who can move us through the city. And again, the only thing I would suggest to the board is, I'm not telling you to move the money from, the ERAF. I wouldn't begin to tell you that until you have some comfort. But, if we can get Bill on board and have him come here and present, I think that would be probably a more educated voice of someone that's in the business, deals with the city, and can give you some, hopefully, assurances as to how we would move forward and the timelines of that.
Now, what about you talking to the city manager and Rex talking to the mayor and saying, hey guys, get your act together?
So the city manager, obviously, he's not an elected official, right? So one of the things that he recommended is that the board, and I think I shared this before, is that the board members speak to, their other elected representatives. Because to what Bob just said, part of the issue is that the city manager was not allowed to add additional staff. So everything is outsourced. So if you want a priority to be given to anything, there needs to be internal pressure put on that project from the electeds, who then go to the city manager and say, this is a high priority for the fire district and for me as a council member, and we would like this to be given every, I'm not going to say special consideration, but certainly trying to keep it moving. Because, Bob's exactly right. They're slammed. And, at least I will give Alex the credit that when he came to me a year ago and said, you got to get this in the system now or else you're going to be standing in the back of the line. I mean, they have that much work over there, as you can also see in our prevention bureau with all the plans.
Well, I would also argue that if you've got a set of plans, even if you're changing architects, keep going with the old set of plans.
Yeah. Well, we're not, so we'll go back and process. Everything's in motion. That's why when I got a little concerned, it's, even though we estimate the time frame is X, we're in the pipeline. So the good news is, as Bob said, he's been in meetings. He talked about the planner that's in our favor right now. I mean, so there are positive things that are moving forward for this project. But again, if we make any dramatic changes, which we understand with what we've already proposed to do with some of the design elements that we were changing, those are not dramatic, so that won't slow us down. But if we were to pull things out, I know you believe it would speed it up, but as Bob said, and I concur, it'll have the opposite effect.
I said ask the question.
Okay, well, okay,
Ask the question.
Fair point. So, but that's kind of how their system works. I mean, anytime anything like that becomes significant, you go back in the line and you start over. I mean, it's crazy.
I mean, a lot of these local jurisdictions who are doing contracting out, et cetera, say, hey, you know, you want a contract plan checker, fine. You pay for it, you can go ahead.
That's the easy part, is the plan checking third party is actually the easy part. I was trying to let you know, as the chief alluded to, that where they're at staff-wise, the significant changes that we talked about, and I took them over and talked to the building official and the planner that's assigned to the project. I'm gonna go as far as to say they consulted of how we could bring this back in with the changes, you know, removing a set of stairs and ways to go to the architect, how we could get the architect to present to them something that they would not say is a change. So they really, the planner, like I said originally, the planner actually was on board with it. The issue, I think, really, kind of hearing more what's coming from this board and the chief, is really from the board of directors to talk to the elected officials to make staff, on the big picture, expedite these things. And that I don't know how it's gonna happen.
Well, one way that we can move it forward, I think, is make a formal request to the city of Menlo Park to rezone both parcels PF. And I've been told, oh, well, they're gonna do that with the building permit. Bullshit. You know, that's not the way you do it. You do your zoning first, and then you do your plan approval. And it's craziness for them to tell us that they will not rezone until they do the planning, the building review. That's backwards. I've never seen a city in my life that's done that.
We would concur, but.
So the one correction to that is, they're not gonna do their planning approval first. What they're requiring to be done first is the environmental review process. Then they're gonna go to their city council for the rezoning, the lot mergers, the use permits, etc., get that approved, and then do the planning approval.
So they're requiring us to do this environmental assessment before they do the rezoning?
Correct.
And that goes back, Director, to the whole downtown specific plan and not allowing the lot merger at that point, because the house that we purchased, the lot behind it, they didn't want to change up everything they were doing at that time. So it is, you know, there are some oddities to it just because of that. I mean, so the downtown specific plan shows the fire station within it, but it's just the fire station, not the piece of property we told them we purchased behind it.
Well, I've wasted more of this board's time than I should on this. I'm obviously pissed. And I hope that between now and the next meeting, that we can make some progress, and I would urge my fellow board members who live in Menlo Park to grab your council members by the throat and say, hey guys, this is unacceptable. And I think you've got enough facts now so that you can go to them and say, you know, we want this thing moved through as if it were a City of Menlo Park project. It's not a commercial building, folks.
We agree.
And we're still at the same starting point with the ordinance. So we talk about grabbing them by the throat, which all help, but it's not gonna, I don't know that that's gonna help our cause. And I'm gonna go back to the 444 El Camino, and the chief and I, with plenty of late night discussions, and I literally got my ear twisted and sat down over at Menlo Park and said the fastest way through the system is through the system. And again, we were, I think a lot like the chief was like, hey, let's go, let's go, let's go. And it wasn't how we proceeded with that. When we backed up a few steps and a year later plus and went through the system, we went right through the system the second time around. When we went back and went through the system, it worked.
We went through the system with what?
With the 444 El Camino project, being able to use it for the training facility.
To park a fire truck inside.
No, I get it. I get all that. But again, we were told, here's the process you need to follow, and then we can get it done. And that's what, when we finally did that, we were using 444 El Camino.
We were using it at about 10% of its potential. In my opinion.
Okay.
And we were using it at 10% of its prior use, which had things parked all over outside, etc., etc. And they would not be doing that if we were part of the City of Menlo Park. This is absolute baloney. I gotta stop talking, we'll never get out of here.
I had a couple of questions, but I wanted to ask first, It's past 2 hours, do we need to change? the
Yes,
date?
that's what I was trying to get everybody's attention to.
Oh.
Okay, so Peter, you're
I'm
assuming
concerned that
that the
Peter's,
motion was
I'm
not
concerned that
made.
Peter's comments didn't get on the tape, so.
Damn.
Actually, it's probably a good thing here.
Well, it still says it's recording, so I think we're good.
Well, if that's the case, let's just keep moving on with this.
Well, no,
It's gotta change
good. I gotta change it. Give me a second here.
You know,
It's an
Can you,
It's okay.
Hey, Bob.
We could have another 40 minutes of this.
you know, there is we can time this meeting out.
Is this thing? It's not stopping.
Anything remaining on the regular agenda that we need to deal with tonight?
Yeah, it's financial.
Before I consider regular,